Her background is in social and cultural anthropology, and her interests revolve around social innovations as changes in social relations and the societal fabric, the role of values and narratives in sustainability transitions, governance of sustainability transitions, and the role of research and transdisciplinary engagements in and the governance of sustainability transitions. And this format of the Lunch and Learn is a 25-minute lecture by Julia. So please hold your questions to the end, which will be followed by a Q&A. And without further ado, Dr. Julia Wittmayer.
Do I need to talk in?
I think so, yes.
I'm living in the Netherlands, but I'm just not as tall as my colleagues. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. To be able to share our experiences with transforming universities and institutional settings for more transformative academic work. To sharing and comparing perspectives on the matter, also to learn from you what you can hear and how that relates to what we do in the Netherlands. So what's needed in order to address those is transitions, and what we mean with transitions is really radical transformations of the cultures, structures, and practices of our societies towards becoming more sustainable. And these transitions are long-term, so it's nothing that we do within a year. Then it wouldn't be a transition, you might argue. We could argue about that. It's about radical and structural changes, I said that, and it's at systems level. So you could think, for example, much research is done in terms of socio-technical change, from the move from horse carriage to car, but also from small-scale agriculture to industrialized agriculture. So there's just different kinds of topics that we're looking into. So this is just a position, to get a bit of some of the definitions going. But what I want to talk about today is that, especially when we talk about transitions and about addressing these kind of societal challenges, that also has implications for how we do research around those, or about those, towards those. And one of the calls is that there's really calls for more transdisciplinary research. So research that is focusing on these really burning problems, that is with societal actors. And there can be policy, there can be community, it can be all range of it, but an active engagement with those communities. As far as I understood, it's the same kind of move here in Canada. It's big in Europe and also as an international field with Future Earth or the ITD Alliance. So it's out there, and there's also asking our universities to take a step in or towards that. Before I talk about the institutional setting, I thought I'd just take you into two examples of transdisciplinary research that we're doing at RIFT, the Dutch Research Institute for Transitions, in which I'm mainly based. One is an example, it's a very old example, but I still would like to use it. It's my PhD research, so I know some of you might have the same sentiment with their PhDs. But I did actual research in Rotterdam, and there it was in 2010 we started, and it was, for those of you who remember, 28, 29 was the big financial economic crisis. Governments were rescuing banks, were not having money left, so somewhere they had to cut budgets. And in the Netherlands, and especially also in the UK, there was this whole framing around from public sector to big society. So society, the communities would take it up where the government couldn't care anymore for certain services. And it was in this context that I went into the city of Rotterdam to do research in a very specific neighborhood. Has anyone been to Rotterdam? Yeah. Oh, cool. Great. So the city is divided by the Maas, which is the big river that also is kind of harbors the harbor. And the north part is the more wealthy part, and the south part is considered the most deprived neighborhood in the whole of the Netherlands, kind of a neighborhood area. And one of those neighborhoods, that's where we did the research. And the question really was like, how can this neighborhood become more sustainable and relations more just? How can we empower the community to take matters into their own hands? And the research question really was around how can we think about transitions, so this long-term societal change process on system levels within the confinements of neighborhoods. What is that then, actually? So that was kind of the research setting that we went into there. And what we did is we used a certain form of governance that's called transition management as a kind of a method that helped us do this. And it's a really full slide, I know, but the only thing kind of important is that part. That's the kind of steps that we use. So it's around going to the community, finding out what's actually happening, and really anthropological, going there, interviews, standing at the schools, just finding out what's actually the matter at hand, what's the problems that these people experience, rather than the policymakers policing them in a way. And from there, we understood kind of certain problem framing that we worked together with about 50 to 20 people from the neighborhood that are already trying to do something different. So they're either engaging in different practices or they're engaging in different ways of thinking of what could be done in that neighborhood. And with these 15 people, we just went through the whole process of also kind of understanding what's the problem, where to go to, what's the future, but also backcasting, how to get there, and then starting experimentation. That's the kind of modeling of how transition governance is going. The community busted our research. In that, on the second meeting, they came like, okay, all of this is very interesting and nice, but our community center, this building here, is closed. They shut it down, and we want it open because it's very valuable for our society, for our community. So what we did with them, we went into a whole process of understanding what is it that they actually want, why it's such a concrete building, what's so important around it, and explored with them ways of self-governance. So what is this participation society that was being announced by the King of the Netherlands? How does it look like in practice if people go and engage with it? So that became on the one hand a research question, but also a research practice in engaging with them, calling lawyers, and just finding out how the construction of who owns the building, all of that works. And yeah, exactly, so to find out about the self-governance and local transition. This is one of the examples. A second example is, yeah, it's in the context. I'll move from that to the context of energy, so energy systems change. And then we were involved in a European funded project. European funding is very important for the academics in Europe. That is around trying to understand how social innovation, so the changes in social regulations and new social practices, how that matters for advancing energy systems change. And in that context, we did a research project with different methods, and I'm only going to go on the city labs part. So 6 cities were part of the process, and we were working with them on specific questions that they had. Specifically, Drift was working with the city of Antwerp, who was trying to understand how they could address energy poverty in their city. What they did is they used the living labs approach. Is anybody familiar with that? Yeah, so the idea that you have kind of a program level of what it is that you want to change, what the challenges are, and then you experiment with different initiatives. And they did so with these 4 initiatives to understand how they could address energy justice in their city. And what we did as researchers is we monitored this living lab through an approach that's called reflexive monitoring. Basically includes that you set up a learning agenda for those people in the program, at the program level, and asked them when we did field diaries and learning sessions. The idea is that kind of monitoring is that you always want to increase the transformative ambition of a project or of an initiative. So it's really about also helping people to intervene in their planning, so to change the plans, basically. It's very much about that. These are 2 examples, just to set a bit of the scene of what I mean when I talk about transdisciplinary or action-oriented forms of research. So when you pursue such research, it really means an awful lot of things for one as a researcher, but also for the institution that one is involved with. This was a cartoon that was being made while we were having a panel talk 2 years ago at the Designing the Transition platform. It was really about the whole scaling of how subjective or normative versus objective are you as a researcher in these kind of research endeavors. And that's really one of the questions, right? What is it, doing this kind of research, how does it question what knowledge is and how it can be produced? So this is a quote that was referring to transition management practice as I just shared it in the context of Rotterdam, saying basically, actually researchers have double roles, and these double roles obscure the analysis, right? They're an impediment to actually a realistic analysis of the case at hand. This is how I got busted for my first conference. I'm not sure many of you have been at a scientific conference for your first presentation, and you know how that feels. So I got really busted, like, you messed with your data, like sharing the actual research that I did. You messed with your data, this is not science, you know, what is that you're doing here? And then I started reading, and I met this guy's reading, Kurt Levin, and they're basically understanding, coming from a different epistemological viewpoint, right, is you only can understand the system when you try to change. There's no other way than through this change. So this is also kind of one of the things you run into when you do this kind of research, and that needs to be taken on. A second one is about rethinking who you are as a researcher. Because what you do is not only doing interviews and analyzing them and writing them up in a publication, right? But you're also facilitating workshops. You're trying to find the right people, who are the right people, who are you to judge. To become a change agent by helping to open this community center, but for whose change is this then about? So you get an awful lot of different roles. That was another one of my quests as a PhD. But it's not also individually. There's a really whole emergent literature around the roles of researchers in these kind of research endeavors and what that and how that can be understood. Also over time within such a project. So it's also a collective process that this field is undergoing. So these are two examples of the very many challenges that there are, the epistemological challenge around what knowledge is, but also the methodological challenge of how then to do it then, how to choose participants, for example. The more personal challenges around the role of a researcher, the question is of course how personal is that actually, but also the political challenges of, for example, in that context in Rotterdam, the policymakers were framing this neighborhood as a deprived neighborhood. And that was their framing onto it. While the community itself had a really different understanding of what their community and the neighborhood was be about. So what are you as a researcher taking on a political stance? Like, whose voice do you give how much weight? Political challenges as a researcher. And then of course the institutional challenges, which I will go more into. I think it's interesting to see also how that then compares with the different academic cultures that we might be involved in. So I termed it being embedded in, at the best, unhelpful institutional settings. What are our career criteria? We only, our performance being measured by publications in specific journals, right? That are within specific disciplines, having their own criteria again. If you're working interdisciplinary, very difficult to get the recognition within this system. The whole idea about the individual hero, this sole authored paper or volume that you should produce, the first authored instead of like the third or the fourth. Well, it's not about thinking process, but your position. Where's the societal relevance? How much does it count in that system? And also one of the things that I find very frustrating in a way, you have this linear careers, like PhD, postdoc, assistant, associate, full professor, and then you're it, something like that. But there's nothing there to deviate. There's nothing like, I'm the educator and it's not about this. I want to innovate education, so where's your place, how to do this? Or, wanting to develop research with societal partners. Does that mean I can't, where are the spaces for these different ways? And what we did, what it is that we're dealing with those, because we are within the setting, we as in those researchers who are doing this kind of research. And we did a study with transformative or engaged researchers at Erasmus University to understand how is it that they're actually dealing with these forces that they're being put upon them. So we come up with two ideal type strategies. One is the pursuit of academic excellence with an outcome that serves a societal purpose. So the idea is you do your research and at the end you have the policy recommendations, just as an example, and that's how you do your impact. That's kind of an outcome. You take the research output as being the one, but you stay within your disciplinary norms because you can, because the publication comes first. And then the second strategy is much more around transforming research through the research process, as the examples that I've just given. So here's already the research process that's much more accountable, but that's also where stakeholder needs, for example, become more important than the scientific norms. So we have tried to make more space for the latter. because the first, I think many of us know and are engaged with, at Erasmus University, we were experimenting with new forms of academic work and with innovating some of the institutional settings that we are engaged in. And that was in the context of what's called the Design Impact Transition Platform. And we called it basically a transition experiment. It's an experiment understanding how would the university transformation look like, how could it look like, where would it need to go, what does it mean for universities to work towards just and sustainable futures, allowing their researchers to work in a helpful environment. And so we do this challenge, transition experiments. The idea is that you are starting from societal challenge. We think current ways of organizing knowledge production are just not sufficient to help us address those problems that I sketched earlier. You also need to really go into what is this new academic system. And then we did action research through that initiative that we engaged in. And the questions that were guiding us is really these alternative forms of academic work, how do they look like, but also how does the institutional setting reflect that help systems. And we did again reflexive monitoring to support our own learning process. Lots of that. This was a bit the institutional context. There was a strategy in 2025 of the Erasmus University claiming to want to do creating positive societal impact. Loads of discussion around what positive means, what impact is. I see some laughter, so you're familiar. But it was really the recognition that their interdisciplinary approaches would help us, but they are underdeveloped. So even the leadership at the ER recognized this and made space for two strategic initiatives. One was a design school, because design thinking, deans seem to love it. It's the idea of prototyping, and there is something to it that our deans loved. So they did a design school and a working group on sustainability and education, and both of these merged together in a design impact transition platform. And we have a 3 years funding, and we hoped that the process would look like this. So we built the boat while sailing it, so we started off and just needed to reinvent structures while not having done the analysis, kind of action research at its best or worst maybe. The second year was more around imagining the future university, so now that we know what's happening, where do we want to go to, also including the whole of the Erasmus University. And for the third year, our big hope was we would be dancing with the deans. They declined our invitation. And the initiative will end at the end of the year, because the strategic money is done. So it will be, I'm not sure you might have followed some of the news, but the politics in the Netherlands, they got a really right-wing government. They're gonna save or want to cut budgets of like €1 billion over the next couple of years, only on higher education. So there's rough times coming up. So the strategy will be focusing on different things, which is interesting, but we can discuss it. So when we started it was one of the things that we did was, okay, what is then transformative research? And we came up with, we did a literature review, and we thought it's really about this. It needs to be systematic on a systems level, basically, or systemic on a systems level. It needs to be reconstructive, and what I mean with this is not accepting the status quo as is. So I love critical theories, taking everything apart, and I love the next step of taking it, putting it back together in a different way, so reconstruction of, and then helping us to move forward from that critical analysis. The plurality of different voices to be involved, but also to collaborate actually, so not only taking it away, but also collaborating with others. Doing that iteratively, we know that this is a really nice thing we would love to do, but that funding often prohibits. And being reflexive for all the things mentioned earlier. And this kind of research we want to do in this kind of environment. So there is, we did another literature review looking into what are the dimensions that are enabling or hindering this kind of transdisciplinary academic work. And it's these 9 dimensions that we came up with, coming back in literature. So one is really the more informal structures, the cultures, the values, but also the formal organizational structures. The inter-organizational collaboration, how does collaboration work between different entities within a university, for example? Leadership plays a huge role. How do they think around these issues? the training of researchers to be able to actually do this kind of research. Is there training available for all, from PhD to professor? But also how is it integrated in actually teaching? And so available for students to have this experience from the start. The question of funding, how is this being funded, is a big one. And of course the reward structures, I talked about that. And so taking some of those, it's what we experimented with. One was alternative ways to organize education. And our big move, I think our big success, was starting a new master on societal transitions that's now in its second year. And there the idea was that university students are often fed knowledge. Right? Universities are knowledge institutions, they are fed knowledge, but it's not about competence development. In the Netherlands, it's very strongly segregated between the universities of applied sciences. They are about competence development, and universities are about knowledge development. And we wanted to marry that. We got it through accreditation, which was big. And we focused on capacities such as think, act, reflect, and relate. So that's really the 4 competencies that we focused on. So that was one of the things, the kind of institutional alternative that we created. But the other one was that we wanted to not have it within one faculty. But because we wanted to have a curriculum that is interdisciplinary for the students, we wanted to involve staff from different faculties. I don't know how it works here, but in the Netherlands, it's where the faculty where it's based, they pay just very little money to get in the educators from other departments. So the kind of incentives are very, very small to be participating in the education of another faculty. We didn't manage to do this, so they weren't wanting to take along with that one. We are now the faculty of the philosophy faculty. That's why it's being located now. Another example that we worked on was this alternative career path. So one of the mechanisms we used there was the idea of DIT academics. That is a secondment for people from different faculties to come 2 days of their work to work at DIT, and there to be able to work together and to develop those ideas around transdisciplinary or transformative academic work, whether in education or in research. Another one was, and it's my colleague, our former colleague Ollie, he was a research developer. And here the idea is that you combine support and academic function in one, because that's where the thinking takes place, it's where it comes together. And you need a different mindset, I find, for being able to do this and to offer alternatives for these kind of brilliant people to think along how can we do research differently, but also get societal stakeholders in, for example. So we have an office that takes care of the societal stakeholders. I find this a very not working way, right? I'm the researcher, and there's this. So combining it makes a lot of sense, because then you have the knowledge and also the legitimacy towards societal stakeholders around the topic. Next one is the alternative funding schemes. So we work with Access. Access is a platform at the province of South Holland, and they are funding transdisciplinary research on the circular economy, so towards circular economy, transition to circular economy. And they let us think along in what it is that they're actually doing and how they do it differently. So one of the things that they were doing is really building this network of people that would then together apply for a fund. So they were already starting working together with a group of people that would grow or not, and coach them through the whole process of putting in the funding, and they themselves also would decide on whether they get the funding or not. So it's the whole idea about this being an objective kind of process is taken out. It's much more coaching people and to work together in getting towards a grant. So really trying to do funding differently for this kind of research. So these were the examples and the kind of strategies that we're using with the platform. Were really one is prefiguration, so trying to show how it works in practice. Trying to build that community, so reaching out, but also being approached by people who say, okay, this is also the kind of work I do. Help. How can we work together? What can we mean for one another? As the Dutch say. Creating legitimacy. So we actually try to publish in order to gain the legitimacy for what it is that we were doing in the academic system. And we were also lobbying, trying to work those internal power structures for some of the mechanisms that worked for others. And now we are at a point, so we have a funeral at the end of the year, so we want to do that very celebratory. I want to have a funeral and then go to the party. But we're now in a moment, we just had last week reflections on what worked, what didn't, what can we also leave in terms of lessons learned for what comes. And I put some around here. This is struggle around interpretive authority. So we started talking about transdisciplinarity and impact in certain ways, also transition, and then this language gets taken over and takes on a completely different meaning and being instrumentalized within these policy processes. See some nodding. So these questions around that, but also around when you are only a 3-year initiative, strategic initiative, you couldn't even apply for funding because we didn't have a status that allowed us to sign. So you want to continue, but kind of these kind of questions. And then interesting one is these learned reflexes. So we had this idea around these developer positions, which we followed for 2 years. And then we had 1 year to go, and we needed to prove we're there. So we didn't know yet we would not continue. And then you get into this reflex of a project management thinking into, what's the deliverables, what do we need to show to win. And they're trying to refrain from this and go back into the experimental mode and stay with the trouble in a way. But it's really much around thinking about yourself of how you have been trained to react in such ways. And also for new people coming, for new staff coming in, how they have been trained to ask, have certain rights and have certain obligations, but how that can be different. And this is really something, kind of an unlearning needs to take place there. As educational scientists in the room, I'm not sure this is the right. So this is some of the institutional dimensions that we put in the paper about from where to where we would need to go in order to get to more transformative work. 12 is long, but I just want to share that I feel as if the work that we've done is part of this broader movement of finding new ways of funding. There's this really big climate research network in the Netherlands, or it's coming now up. It's from the main public funder of research. They came up with it and they want to do it differently, so they are now looking into lessons learned as well and how to do it. And Dirk Lobach, with whom I've read the article, he's become the academic director of it, so there's hope there can be some change. They didn't ask him for nothing, we hope. There's the whole idea around transdisciplinarity getting much more institutionalized. That's one of the German kind of institutions that was just recently funded for bringing it together and creating this community of practice for transdisciplinary researchers, but also other movements, the open access movement, citizen science, decolonization of academia. So there's much happening in ways of trying to, from bottom up, change what we're doing. In terms of assessments and how to do, I love the slow science movement. I find it just very interesting. Is it really publish or perish, or how can we do that differently? But also different ways of how we get assessed. And then just the alternative academics, academics not being at universities, how do we go about working together? And it's just the last slide, a reminder that whenever we reflect on societal processes and engage with whatever kind of research we do, it's inevitably having been changes gonna be following from there. So thank you very much.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Julia. I'm Blaine Harvey, and just wanted to kind of, first of all, thank you for this. We've got time now for some questions and answers. I'm going to ask if one of my colleagues could do just clock checks, let me know when we're running out of time. I think a lot of resonance with some processes and experiences. I look around the room and I was thinking about this sort of, I really appreciate the systemic perspective of transforming teaching and how we do that. And we have some colleagues who are part of a new campus-wide climate course that's trying to think about that. How do we transform administration? And great to see some folks from the NUVIC and from the Office of Sustainability thinking about, like, how do we kind of, these things, you know, that sort of nested within one another, how do we transform the funding practices that we rely on? And I think sitting underneath this, how do we acknowledge and perhaps transform the mindsets that brought us here in the first place, often that defined what our success and our entry into prestigious institutions was based upon, and then being invited to throw those out the door in favor of something different is a big ask. So I think we've got colleagues from other universities down the street here who might also have some of their own kind of processes and perspectives to share. So I think let's maybe open the floor up for a few questions, or if you have feedback on sort of like your own experiences and how they relate to elements of this, they would be great to hear. I'll apologize in advance. We're recording this, so I will repeat your question. It's not because I think you're not understandable. It's just so that they're captured with the recording. Does anyone want to kick us off? Sure.
Yeah, my name is Stephanie. I work at the Shift Center for Social Transformation just down the street at Concordia. And I was really interested to hear you. I heard you talk about that kind of collaboration element as one of your principles, but for us, we're working a lot with questions of accountability and how for us it's really anchored in an awareness of power dynamics when we're thinking of doing research in partnership with communities, and how success is being defined by their terms and not by our terms. And I was just wondering, you're doing like so much amazing work looking at transforming the whole system. I'm just wondering like where that part of it, to make sure that we're transforming it actually to like a place we want to be heading to. Yeah.
So I'll just repeat that. So just so how does kind of how does considerations of power and authority and so on define kind of who you collaborate with and what you're working towards in terms of transformation?
Yeah. And so from having worked with Elaine, I understand that the context is really different here in Canada. But from this very concrete example of where I've been working in Rotterdam, the community asked for their own accountability, so they put us on the map, like, what is it that you're actually doing here? And let us talk about the terms with which we are doing it. So they haven't done it before and then, putting it up. But it was a real negotiation of, who are you? What the hell are you doing here? And what's really interesting in the development, especially in that area of Rotterdam South, is that they get researched quite a bit as objects of research. There's not much awareness by some of my colleagues, I would say, around what it actually does in terms of kind of this. But they started up their own cooperative. They're now thinking about how to own their data and share that in different ways, which is helped by other researchers, which is really interesting to see. So there's a whole dynamic starting up, especially with those that are more asked for research and therefore gotten more exposed to it. But specifically, the whole ethics of this kind of research is what we've been looking into with Elaine quite a bit. And then it just also needs a different kind of accountability and a different kind of review process. And there's a very strong institutionalized one here. We just started 5 years ago. So you can imagine that I hadn't to do any kind of ethical review process for my research in kind of stuff. There wasn't something like that. So now we do it, and now it's also the question of to do it, but then it's very, very formalized. This form, everybody does it. You have to fill in, it just takes us an hour, and then but how can it be more helpful, especially when you do the kind of research that you are in situ having to take decisions on whom to support and whom not, and which voice to, amplify, which one not, and how to do this. So it's an open question. I think we could learn a lot from what you're doing here. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Julia.
Thank you very much, Julia. I really enjoyed your talk and also heard a lot about connections and resonances. It's amazing to see the way that some of these dilemmas and challenges, across the ocean. Something I'm thinking about right now is the pace of transformation, and I don't know much about what you called slow academia, but I already like it. I also think this work is urgent, and I hear you trapped in structures that you need to have deliverables and within timeframes, and you have to have something to show before you can apply again. And I'm just trying to grapple with the tension between urgency and the essential role of slowness in doing things carefully. It takes time to build the kinds of relationships that you were talking about. And that's a really important, it's not just a step. So can you say more on that and help me think through this dilemma?
I'm not sure I can help you think through it all. Yeah, so it's definitely a point. I think we all love the slow science aspect just because of the word slow, promising contemplation and being able to go deep rather than fast, and maybe more shallow than we would like to in order to get the next tick on our resume or wherever. This actual research took me 5 years, right, from start to end, and I have never had the chance again to do this in this way. And that is, on the one hand, due to how funding structures work. And on the other hand, is that many of the people that have been living there have moved away, policymakers have moved to different places. So that's also a matter. It's not only us changing, but also on the other end of it. But what I'm trying to do is always going back to the kind of people with whom if I write a new proposal that I've been working with earlier, in order to be able to continue the thinking and see where they are now, and see how to go from there. It costs a lot of time. Yeah, so just submitted just submitted a research proposal where I tried to build again a collaboration within Rotterdam, working on the heat transition, so how to heat in more sustainable ways than gas. It's all gas in the Netherlands. It has really nice initiatives, arts-based initiatives, trying to prefigure what it looks like, and they're really networking how these collectors community collectors already connecting themselves, doing quite a lot of work, and the city, so getting all these three in, and it's just a lot of calling and doing and stuff. And now we need to see whether we actually get the money in order to continue. But for me, it's really depending on the money, well, for them it's different. But at the same time, how to get the money for them in as well. So I think I'm always trying to get them so they also get funding, because otherwise, just this aspect are far. Yeah, but it's a remains a struggle.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes, so we still have a time for a few more questions. We've got one right here in the back. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I am not a doctoral student or anything like this. I'm just here to say you have a wonderful presentation and I love your work. But I have a question about, in fact, it's less a question about your research, it's more on pondering. You mentioned in this last answer that things change quickly and people have even moved away, which makes the process of having this slow research quite difficult, because you can't have some perfect isolated environment that you can always talk to the same people all the time. And also global events can change how people see the same event that you were researching 5 years ago, and it has completely changed perceptions, which can then influence the research and then vice versa. So I was thinking that this kind of research is not just important, it is vital to do slowly, but also it would be even more valuable to have this same type of research done in different places, with different cultures, different societies, different problems to solve. But with this same approach, that way it would be very, very interesting to have comparative data to see like how fast things move in one community versus another community, and to see whether or not that actually changes how the research has to be done to be more accommodating for different groups. I just thought that.
I'll just repeat it for the transcript, but I guess if I understand, then like keeping with a problem that's evolving as you do slow research alongside it, and the dynamics of the problem, the actors in the problem, and so on and so forth evolve, and you are trying to keep up with it, and that there may be benefit in learning about how that works across different sites. So.
Yeah, so one, I think the slowness is one on building relationships. I think I'm 20 years in the game now, no, 50. And it starts to emerge that I think, there are real relationships being developed as well. And that's, I think, the time aspect and the slow aspect. But slowness also comes in by just taking time to discuss research ideas in a very collaborative manner. And there's this book, it's called The Slow Professor. And one of their things is that it's really about, they say it's about collaboration and working together and taking that time to do so. So that's part of what they call slow. But at the same time, transformations are like, we say 15 to 30 years or so. And research projects are 3 years. So it's never that you can say had this impact, it's actually transformed. You're only kind of having this kind of temporary impulses. I've made my peace with it, but at times it keeps on being frustrating, especially when you're now like 15 years into the game, see how some things are really, really slow, while others have accelerated as well. So you see both the slowness as well as the kind of exploration. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Andrew. I'm an engineering PhD student researching in sustainable manufacturing. So one kind of fundamental problem that we have is we're doing research and we're developing new technologies. So we have gasoline cars, now we have electric cars and natural gas cars. But all of these things are adding on. They're all increasing the overall pollution. But for what we need for transition, sustainable transition, is sometimes to do less and not to do more. But the way that academia is structured, you're always doing more. And is this a problem that you've seen in other disciplines? And have you found any way out of this kind of trap?
It's that's an interesting trap. What we do, we have in the transition studies, we have this one image. It's an X curve. So you have if you look at innovation, you have usually kind of an S curve. Innovation starting, building up, institutionalizing, and then to make an X out of it, you need something to let go, destabilize, and then phase out. So, and that it's getting more and more attention to this part of the curve. So there's more around, especially in Europe, there's quite some funding now around looking into the phasing out of coal and coal regions and what that does with those regions, what did they need to let go of. But also it's also always added on with innovation. So they started with technological innovation and now you use social innovation, basically to talk about new social practices. But it is in the framing of innovation, something new needs to be there so that you can justify putting money into it. It seems in the current way the policy works. So it is a trap. We try to make Trojan horses out of it, using the terminology, but trying to look into how to unlearn, basically, or let go, or do it differently. But it remains a challenge. But I find that there's more and more money going into that as well now. Yeah. At least Europe has this just transition funds. That's really about how to phase out these coal regions and also putting money into kind of letting go and letting up at the same time. These dynamics. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. I'm an undergrad student, and I'm wondering if there's anything that either did occur during the process of research and faculty you could see occurring that undergrads could do to kind of push administration to adopt something closer to this model of a transformative university as opposed to
Yeah. In the Netherlands or in Europe, we have the green offices. Is that something that rings a bell?
like offices and
Green offices, yeah. So basically, students coming together to push the universities to become greener, more sustainable. So any form of protest and active participation in any of the formal structures is very, very welcome. And any evaluation of this, evaluation of your courses, saying this is what you want more or less. That's very helpful because this is being read and that's going into how your teachers are going to be evaluated as well. And maybe if enough students ask for it, they might change it around and basically get a societal partner into the room to learn with you on certain topics, for example. Yeah, thanks.